Sponsored by RevenueCat, where you can add subscriptions to your iOS project in minutes rather than hours, so you can forget about any StoreKit problems and get back to building your app. Hello, my name is Paul, and this talk is called 5 Steps to Better SwiftUI Views. Just briefly, if you haven't heard of my work before, I run a site called hackingwithswift.com, where there's stacks of free Swift and SwiftUI tutorials. Anyway, at this point with SwiftUI, we're past the novelty. Folks understand how easy it is to build and prototype fantastic looking applications. We're used to the idea that we can have state managed effectively in our application. Plus, we know we can write great cross-platform code for macOS, iOS, watchOS, and more. However, although many folks are writing increasingly large SwiftUI programs, we're still a long way from figuring out what best practices look like. We're still trying to understand what it means as we write bigger and bigger programs. And it's happening. Folks are writing increasingly complex SwiftUI programs, and we're starting to suffer from the same problems we had in UIKit. For example, the classic UIKit problem was, of course, MVC, Model View Controller, became Massive View Controller. It was retronymed that, which isn't great. But of course, in SwiftUI, we don't have view controllers. In fact, some folks would say that's the best feature of SwiftUI. There are no view controllers. However, we do have lots of views, and we cram lots of functionality into them. Logic, actions, layout, and more. And this has created a wholly new problem, which is that every view is large. And helpfully, this has the acronym EVIL, which I think tells you a great deal about what I think about it. Now, in practice, evil comes in many forms, including lawful evil, where you're doing your best, but your views still get large. Or neutral evil. You'd like to do your best, but your team doesn't have the time, resources, funding, and as a result, your views get large. Then there is chaotic evil. You're using your views as dumping grounds, just like you might have done with AppDelegate in the olden days. Now, of course, as we all know, the only thing required for evil to triumph is for good programmers to do nothing. So in this talk, I'm going to present 5 steps anyone can take to improve their SwiftUI views, making them simpler, smaller, easier to understand, easier to reuse, and more. And these steps are small enough you can implement them easily, no matter what kind of evil you have in your project right now. And I should say, this is going to be super fast. So if you want to watch it again, don't feel too bad about it. I'm going to race through this. I know your time's precious. We'll get right into the code now. So I've made a simple sandbox project right here in Xcode to demonstrate the ways we can improve our code. It's running right now here in the sim. As you can see, you can choose a destination like Abu Simbel in Egypt or the Blue Mountains, Australia. I'm going to choose Penang in Malaysia. You can see there's a picture of Penang, some titles, information about Malaysia, a little factoid, a little travel advisory. You can add and remove favorites. So you can see this little icon here. It's got a heart next to it. It's a favorite place to go. I can remove that if I wanted to start a fight. And you can, of course, show it in a map to see exactly where Penang is in the world. Plus a little tip screen here where you can say, where do I want to go or when to travel or whatever. Little tip screen. One last thing in our Discover view here, you can press Show Only Favorites and it'll filter down to only the ones you've marked with a heart. So that's our base application. It's very simple, and that's intentional, but it's written in such a way that it'll show off the 5 ways we can simplify our view code. Now, the first way you can simplify your views is by carving off independent parts of your views into properties, getting them out of your body into separate properties, or sometimes methods. For example, in listing view, we have down here this big old code for making a toolbar button. This is the one I showed you a minute ago for toggling, showing all locations or only favorites. And this is important code. Like, I want to have this functionality. I just don't want to have it here. This is right inside my body for my view. And alongside the navigation view, the list, the section, navigation links, plus my toolbars, it's a lot of code in here. And if you're writing this in UIKit, you'd make your right bar button items array using individual objects. You'd say, make my first button, second button, third button, and then make an array of those into my right bar button items. You wouldn't try and do it in one massive line of code. It'd just be hard to work with. And The same's exactly true here in SwiftUI. We have this button here. We can actually yoink that whole thing out into a custom computed property inside listing view, and then use that inside our body to make our code easier to think about. And so with that whole button plus modifier selected, I'll press Command X to put it onto my clipboard. And then at the end of body, I'll say there's a new property called favorites button, return some kind of view, and paste it right on in there. The same code, unchanged. And now in my toolbar, I'll just say toolbar, favorites button. Use that button inside our toolbar, and the code still builds just fine. It runs exactly the same, looks the same. There's no real difference from a user's perspective. It's exactly the same. And this works great for any kind of supplementary views, like toolbar buttons, like tab items, like alerts, like sheets. Anything that's not part of the core thing you're trying to show on the screen, I'd get it out of there into an external property that's easier to work with. Now, realistically, at compile time, there's no difference to Swift having this here versus having it directly inline in the body property. There's a simple function call. It's a property, but it's a function call realistically. And that'll be optimized away. It'll be inlined very nicely by the Swift optimizer. It'll do great work here. And you could, if you wanted to, use a method. You could say, func favorites button, return some view, and then do favorites button. I wouldn't do that, only because SwiftUI does use a body property. This matches the SwiftUI way of thinking. It's very clear. It's declarative. We're not doing lots of work in here. It's not a computationally expensive thing to call. It's just some layout happening like that. So I prefer a property, but it's down to you. These properties also work great, by the way, when your body is being recomputed. When you've changed your program state, for example, because it will recall the properties as needed. For example, in this code here, we have a for each. And in the for each, if we're showing favorites, we then filter our locations here. Otherwise, we just show all locations. And we can actually carve that out into another property. Let's take this whole piece of code out like this, boom. And then go down here and say there is another property. var items returns an array of location. And paste that in there. And now flesh out a bit so it's easier to read. If showing favorites, then return that thing. Line break there. There we go. Else return that thing. So a more natural sort of Swifty way of writing this code. So we can go ahead and now use that inside our for each. Just do for each items, which I think is so much clearer in terms of writing your code. If I, of course, make no mistakes about it, I've got to say return down here. That'll make it much happier. There we go. It's a much clearer way of thinking, I think, because now we're not doing this sort of inline logic inside our body. We're saying go ahead and calculate everything we need beforehand or elsewhere. So when body finally runs, all the logic is ready or decided or simplified, ready to go. And that means, I think, kind of looking at your code critically, thinking, where are my conditions? Where's my logic? Where can I get things out of my view and put it somewhere else? For example, if we look in location view, we have an if condition right here on line 23. And this is trying to show the little heart icon, if it's a favorite place or not. And again, this is important. I don't want to get rid of this kind of code. I want this kind of functionality in there, but I don't want it there. Because I'm either looking at the layout here or I'm looking at logic. Because you can see it's mixing the two right now. There's like layout of scroll view, layout of Z stack, layout image, and then suddenly a big condition, followed by more layout, and so forth. It's kind of mixing up conditions and logic and layout, which is messy. Realistically, you're not going to want to read this code most of the time. The logic should be put somewhere else where you can handle it separately. And this should be the results of your logic, the body. And so you might think, fine, I'll just go ahead and select this whole if block here. And again, yoink that out into its own property. So I'll Command X that if block and then make a property up here somewhere. Let's do var favorite icon is some view and paste it all in there like that. And as you can see, It doesn't work. You can't do that. Even if you do say, return in here, it's still not going to work because we're saying our favorite icon will return some kind of view. But it'll only return some kind of view if it is a favorite location. If it isn't, what happens here? An else block, right? It won't always work. And so Swift will be unhappy with us for very right reasons. Now we could, if you wanted to, enable SwiftUI's view builder system here. We could say, I want to use @view builder var favorite icon some view, and then remove return. And now the code will compile correctly. So you could now say, I want to have just favorite icon just there. That it works, right? You could do that if you wanted to. Again, I wouldn't. I happen to think that if you have @viewbuilder in your code, bit of a code smell, you're kind of saying, hey, I acknowledge that I have complex logic in here. Please figure it out for me. I think a better solution is just to not do that. In fact, it's given me a neat and somehow carefully planned segue into my second tip to help you make your SwiftUI views simpler, smaller, more maintainable, more reusable, not to use ViewBuilder. And it is to simply break them up. It's the most obvious thing in the world. It works brilliantly in SwiftUI. Break big views up into smaller views. Don't try and make more and more properties, particularly if you're doing ViewBuilder. I'm going to undo this change. Get back to what we had before, which was this thing here. And I'm going to go ahead and break this view up into multiple kinds of views. Because right now you can see very clearly, we've got this big view of the picture, the heart icon, the text below it, the buttons below it, and so forth. I'm going to carve off just one part of this into a separate view so you can see how this looks. And that means I'm going to go ahead and select the whole if plus the image, the whole thing like that, and take it out onto my clipboard. And now I'll press Command N to make a new file, choose SwiftUI view, and I'll call this thing location header.swift, like this. And then I'll go ahead and paste that into the body property, like this. And we've got to have the location, as you can see, it wants a location and a data controller. Both of those we can kind of steal from our location view here. I'll just take these two here. So that is, boom, take out showing map, like that. So we've got to pass in a data controller and a location when we make this header view. And now, inside our Z stack, we can just say, hey, pass in that location. So here's my Z stack. I'll say location header is location, our location. And it's probably still complain because the preview needs an example location. So I'll just do location is location.example, one I made earlier. Helpful that. And that's it. So I've ripped out that whole view into its own view. And now I've isolated the functionality somewhere else. All that condition to be shown over the image is handled by that image header. It knows what to do automatically. I haven't got to worry about it when I care more about my text or my buttons down here. They are split out nicely and neatly. I think it's a big improvement. And in fact, this is particularly powerful when used with list rows or for each, anything that involves some kind of content closure being called. For example, in our listing view, back in this, we have this for each here. Nearly all the view code for listing view is inside this for each. It's just massive. It's this whole chunk of code here describing a single row. Like one of these rows, there's a picture of the flag, overlay, title, description, a navigation link. That's all happening right in here. There's lots and lots of code to do one single row. So our listing view is not really describing itself. It's also having to describe its children, which makes it very, very long. And this is a great example of places you can rip out things into their own view. Just like, again, we used to do in UIKit with UI table view cell subclasses. So I'm going to go ahead and select the entire navigation link and Command X that to my clipboard and then paste it into a new view. So again, Command N, new file, SwiftUI view. I'll call this thing a listing row. And I'll just paste all that into the body property like that. And now we've got to add the location property so it knows what to show. So I'll just say, let location be a location. Pass one of these in my example down here again. Location is location, location.example. Boom. And now our for each is much, much simpler. We can just say each row is a listing row with location being location. That's it. And the result will be exactly the same. Boom, as you can see in the preview, exactly the same. But now we've taken out all that code to describe rows and put it into a row view. That'll be shown again and again and again. Now, we can actually go a step further because two marvelous Swift features combine right here. First up, all our views in SwiftUI, including listing row, are all structs, which means Swift will automatically generate for us a member-wise initializer, an initializer method that will accept the parameters for this thing, which in this case is a location. And second, this for each we have here is actually a view under the hood. It's a struct view. And that means it too has an initializer. And the second parameter for that is what to do with a given item from the array. So you say go over all the items, and for a given item, in our case, a given location, give me one of those things, and I'll send you back a view. So on one side, we have a member-wise initializer. Give me my parameter, a single location. I'll give you back a listing row. On the other side, we have a for each struct that expects to be given a function that takes a location and returns a view. Right now, it's all trailing closure stuff. It doesn't need to be. We can bring them together. We can say, do this at the same time. We'll do for each items, content is listing row dot init. For each item in the array, create a listing row. And that is just beautiful. And as you can see, it works exactly the same way. There's no difference here in terms of actual end user functionality. It's quite brilliant. Okay, that's our first two steps complete. So now let's look at step 3, which is getting action code out of your views. And this is the flip side of getting logic out of your views. We had those if statements and similar, getting out of the views. It's now onto action code. This is just as important, quite frankly. And so, for example, in location view, we have buttons. One for toggling favorites here, and one for showing a map. Both of which put their action code directly into the button closure. Here it is, toggle favorite here, or set a boolean to true, and I think my dogs are sitting outside the door. They are. They know I'm talking to myself. They know this treat's going. Bunch of bad dogs. Yes, hello both dogs. Come on quickly. I'm on a tight time here. You. And you. Well done. All right. So we're putting the action code directly into the button, which is weird because we're now mixing together layout, hstack spacer, button, and logic, if statements and loops and so forth, and action closures, all in one thing. It's a real nightmare of work. At the very least, we should be getting the action functionality out somewhere else, even though in both these places, hello dog, come on, quick shot. Last one though. Even though in both these places, it's just one line of code. This thing here, one line of code. This thing here, one line of code. I'd rip them both out. So I'll just take this whole toggle favorite line here and move it into its own method. So again, put it to the clipboard, go down the way and say func toggle favorite, and just paste it in there directly. And now the button for that becomes a bit simpler. We can say, get rid of these braces, boom, and say action is toggle favorite, boom. So we're saying when this button is pressed, call toggle favorite straight away. Now remember, we don't want to say toggle favorite open and close parens. That means you can find out my action by calling toggle favorite and it will return the action to you that you want to call later on. Without the parens, it means when I'm tapped, call toggle favorite. And you might think this is worse because our code's actually a bit longer because we now have the little signature here as well, func toggle favorite. But it's particularly odd, I think, because it's only one line of code, right? There's only one thing happening here. It wasn't that much of an egregious problem in our body. But now it's a separate method, we can do more with it. We can go ahead and write a unit test to say, make my location view struct, call toggle favorite on it, and check things actually happened. Check it written out to user defaults or wherever it's going to. We can actually verify our code without a UI test. And let's face it, if most of the time, if you want to have a UI test, you probably have hate problems for yourself because they're not very pleasant things, right? So this allows us to get our code, our action code out of our body and therefore write tests for it. Particularly if you have multiple lines of code in here, it makes your body much, much simpler again. And of course, we can do the same thing for showing the map. Take the single line out and say func show on map. Boom, like that. And then say button show on map. We'll do action is show on map. I'll just indent things neatly like that. Boom. Again, we're only moving one line of code out here, but it's surprisingly common to see actual complex closures passed in line with button actions or toolbar actions or similar. And getting them out does make your code easier to understand and work with. In fact, what I found time and time again is that when I'm working with my code, I'm either thinking about the actions I want to perform, the methods I want to run, or the layouts. I'm not flipping between the two of them very much, so having the methods separately is a real help. And in fact, now they are separate methods. They actually work inside the jump bar, so you can go straight to show on map or toggle favorite if you want to later on, which you wouldn't get when they're inline closures. So it's a big improvement across the board, I think. If you wanted to, you could take this even further. You could say in listing view, we made that little favorites button thing here, which calls our property. You can actually break that property up further. Go as far as you like. Take that code out with animation code, put that in a special method, func toggle favorites, like that. Just go ahead and paste it on in there. And now your button code becomes simply, let's do button action is toggle favorites. Boom. So again, your code gets a little bit simpler to understand. You can now call toggle favorites from elsewhere if you want to testing purposes and similar, which is great. Plus, we're breaking up layout and functionality. We're not cramming them all into the same properties, same methods and similar. That's always nice. Okay, for our fourth way to simplify views, I want to head back to locationview.swift. Because here we have these three titles showing information about our place, country, did you know, and travel advisories. And these are nice, and they're all done using these pieces of code here. And you can see they have title 2, secondary foreground color, black font weight, and text case uppercase multiple times. Exactly the same set of modifiers to get an exact look. And we want that look. We want to keep it looking like that, but it's unnecessarily long, and it's also flaky. If you decide to go to, say, title 3, you go, okay, fine, title 3 here and title 3 here, and whoops, you forgot one by accident, and now you've got a problem. So you've got different font sizes. So it's not great having to repeat yourself again and again and again. So what we're going to do is we're going to rip that code out again and place it into a custom view extension. So we have more control over reusing this layout exactly right. And so I'll go ahead and take all four of these modifiers onto my clipboard and make it just here. Ideally put it somewhere else, but here's fine. Make it in extension view. I'll call this thing func header style, return some view, and then do self with that attached. So the same modifiers apply to whatever I call it on. And now we can say, or being well, is slightly angry at me because, why are you angry at me? You're angry because, let's do text. That'll be why. Don't do it on view, do it on text. We can't have font weights on views, doesn't work. Anyway, so I've got text like that for header style, and now I can use that method like any other kind of modifier. It now just bundles them together into one single use case for me. So I could say that my country here, this is dot header style. Or did you know? You are dot header style. And advisories, you are .header style. It makes it really nice to encapsulate commonly used header styles or text styles or image styles or you name it in one simple place. And by having it as an extension of text, it only appears possible on text views, not other kinds of views. You won't see header style polluting your global namespace. I actually find these extensions really useful sometimes because, particularly if I'm doing cross-platform code, I can have custom methods in place to control platform customizations. I could say, for example, I want to have an extension on view itself to have func iOS with some kind of content, which is a view. Pass in a modifier function that takes our self and returns some kind of new content, which itself returns some view. And then inside there we can say, if the OS is iOS, call our modifier on ourself. Otherwise, do not call the modifier, send it back. And this kind of helpful little method here is really great because now anywhere you say, actually, I'm on macOS and iOS or watchOS or tvOS, whatever you want to work with, but only on iOS, it doesn't look quite right. I want to customize it here to add some more padding or different color or whatever it is. You can now say something like, for our header style, I'll do .iOS. I want to have $0 padding is 10. Like add 10 extra points of padding on iOS, but not macOS, tvOS, watchOS, however you want to. And then once you've done that, you go ahead and add other methods, func macOS, func watchOS, or whatever platform you're supporting, with exactly the same code, just changing iOS here and here. Conditionally apply this modifier to macOS or watchOS. Just for little kind of small tweaks between platforms, it works really, really well. Let's take that out again. Okay, the fifth and final step in this whirlwind talk about making better views is to use styles, which are a separate beast to view extensions. Now, again, in location view, we have these buttons at the bottom down here, and they have very particular styles. They have a little bit of padding, blue background color, white foreground color, and then a clip shape of capsule. And we could, again, take those out into custom extensions. I could say, I want this bunch of modifiers here, and I'll say there is an extension on button. I'll call this thing func primary style, returns some view, like this, and do self that. Just the same four modifiers, and that works. You can totally do that if you want to. You could then go down here and say, let's do button that dot primary style, and then same thing there. That code works. If you want to do that. But SwiftUI has a better solution, which is the ButtonStyle protocol. This will hand us a button label, whatever's on the button, as a separate configuration view, and we can position it or modify it however you want to. And to do that, we'll go back to our little extension here and change it out. We'll say instead of that code here, there's a struct called primary button style, which returns a button style. And we'll say func make body. There's a little code completion helping me out. Takes that configuration data I told you about, returns some kind of view. And in there, we'll use that configuration label, the view that describes the content of the button. Then padding, background, foreground, and clip shape. The rest of it's the same. And with that in place, we now no longer call primary style directly. We instead say, I want to use button style of primary button style, my custom struct, applied there and applied there. And in this instance, fine, the result is pretty much identical. Not exactly the same, but pretty much the same. But now we're using a custom button style. We get extra control that would not be possible with a simple view extension. For example, we might want to say, when my button's actively being pressed, like held down by someone's finger right now, or mouse if they're on macOS with Catalyst or whatever, do something different. You might want to say, I want to have this blue color be slightly transparent, whatever. So it's got a bit of indication it's being pressed right now. And this is available to us through configuration.isPressed. Is it being pressed right now? So we could say background is going to be configuration.isPressed. If true, then color.blue.opacity 0.5. otherwise color.blue. So now when it's being pressed, it'll go slightly transparent. Let's give that a quick try. So you can see what I mean. So I'll choose the Blue Mountains, beautiful place, and then press add favorite. See that? It's going slightly blue as I press over it. Very, very nice and simple. So now, not only has our view code gotten a lot smaller, taking code out into this header style thing or this button style, but we're now getting a completely reusable button style that can go anywhere in our program with extra functionality, tracking is pressed or not. So that's our 5 things. Let's go back to some slides. And that wraps up our lightning fast discussion of how to banish evil from your SwiftUI code and replace it with beautiful SwiftUI code you can be proud of. To summarize, we covered 5 things here. First up, making your supplementary views properties like toolbars, alerts, sheets, and more. Breaking larger views into smaller ones rather than trying to use View Builder. We looked at how to get action code out of your view body, make it more testable. We looked at how to make view extensions for styling, including a custom iOS or macOS one for optional code by platform. And finally, we looked at button style. There's also list style, toggle style, and many, many more. Again, it's been a really, really fast talk, but I hope you enjoyed it. If you've got questions, hit me up on Twitter. I am 2straws there, or you can email me. I am Paul at hackingwithswift.com.